Great. Well, good to see all of you, whatever time zone you might be in around the world. We're very pleased today to have our AGU early career webinar today given by Anna Riddell from Geoscience Australia. In fact, this is the second time Anna has graciously agreed to give one of our early career webinars. Earlier, she spoke to us about vertical motion in Australia. You can watch that recording online if you want to learn more. But today she's agreed to speak with us on a topic we've had an earlier webinar about the need for more geodesists and how do we go about recruiting them. We had invited Anna to participate in an AGU fall meeting session. Unfortunately, wasn't able to pull that off, but we are very glad that Anna has agreed to give this presentation to us today on all the different efforts that she is involved in Australia that can hopefully be lessons learned, transformed around the world to help people learn how to recruit more geodesists. So without further ado, I will let Anna get started. Again, we'll have her give her presentation and then save all questions to the end. And without further ado, Anna, please go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thanks everybody for joining wherever you are joining from today. I'd like to start by, pointing out that this is not just a presentation from me. I've pulled a lot of thoughts and perspectives and opinions from my fellow colleagues all across Australia. So even though I'm presenting on behalf of a lot of people. Here in Australia, we like to start any gathering or meeting with an acknowledgement of country. And so I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians of the country throughout Australia. I'm acknowledging their continuing connection to the land, waters and community, and pay my respects to the people, the cultures and the elders past, present and emerging. Today, I am coming to you from Lurawita, Nipaluna, so Hobart in Tasmania, on the lands of the Moanina people. A little bit about me and why I wanted to talk about this. I love geodesy. I am super proud to call myself a geodesist. I grew up on a beef farm in a fairly remote part of Tasmania, which being an island state, we consider ourselves to be fairly remote and rural, even though we have access to all of the modern day luxuries, I guess. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I finished high school. A lecturer from the University of Tasmania came and spoke to one of my mathematics classes when I was in my final years of sort of formal education in year 12 and introduced me to the idea of a Bachelor of Surveying. I was like, well, that sounds interesting. I can travel the world with that. I can be outside. I quite enjoyed being outdoors. And so I took a bit of a punt, really, and decided to do this degree in surveying and spatial sciences. Ended up with a double major in surveying and remote sensing and GIS. Had been introduced to the concept and the science of geodesy probably around my second year of formal, tertiary education. And it sounded really exciting. The idea that we can map and understand our world in 3D, 4D sometimes with the changes over time. And I was hooked. So I did an extra year of study, which was a research project for a year around understanding the sea level extreme events down at Macquarie Island by calibrating the tide gauge with a GPS-equipped buoy. And then met some fantastic people from Geoscience Australia, which led me to get my first job and only job as a geodesist. So I've been with Geoscience Australia ever since. I think I'm coming up for 12 years with GA now. And although I've held different roles at Geoscience Australia, they've always been geodetically or geodesy flavoured. So geodesy had me hooked. I then took a bit of time away from work to go and dive back into the research world and did my PhD looking at the tectonic motion and vertical land motion of the Australian continent, understanding the quirks and the systematics in reference frames, how we can better derive the uncertainty and come up with some meaningful answers for getting the absolute best out of every and each geodetic technology that we have access to. So I guess the point of providing a bit of this background was that geodesy as a term, as a science, as an idea, didn't really come into my world or my vocabulary until my early 20s, which I think was a bit late. I was, I guess, lucky that I had some fantastic mentors and people that were able to guide me in the right direction to on the dark side, on the dark path of geodesy. But I'm very glad that they did, and I definitely would not look back or change it if I had a chance. Alrighty, to dive into the content of what are we talking about today. We in Australia have been watching very closely and with a lot of interest around this declaration out of the US of a geodesy crisis. So there was the paper that came out in early 2022 that kind of described what is going on and why this is a problem. That got picked up by some of the media a little bit in Australia, caused a little bit of chatter. So one of our local magazines and publications called Spatial Source or Position Magazine picked that up and talked to a couple of our geodesists in Australia and kind of asked what's going on. Is it the same in Australia as they're saying in the US? And I think in essence, it's almost as bad in Australia, but not quite as bad as in the US. So there's that balance of we still have a problem, and we've noted that we've had a problem for a little while, and how can we go around addressing that? And so some of the quotes from the Australian article around that geodesy skills are in demand across industry, government, and academia. It's not any one sector. There's an increased recognition that location-based data is the key to making better decisions, meaning that people trained in geodesy can apply their skills to a wide range of problems. So it's not just keeping ourselves away from these big problems that society is facing. I think one of the main issues that came out of this article that was raised really nicely by Nicholas Brown was that from a government perspective, we're now competing with emerging industries like the intelligent transport sector around driverless and intelligent car systems, and that the providers of location-based services for a limited, there's a limited pool of geodesists, but there's a lot of technology and application out there that a geodesist could go and do. And I think the other really neat point is that the term geodesist is really broad. It kind of encapsulates a lot of skills and a lot of different areas of application. And so I think there was a really nice point in the webinar previously that kind of picked up that some people don't recognize or call themselves geodesists, but there are certainly tools that are being used by a variety of sectors and applications that they could definitely call themselves geodesists. And as a keen geodesist myself, I encourage everybody to use the terms, to use the label, call yourself a geodesist. It's not, we're welcoming, I think. We don't want to be exclusive in that. And so there was a little bit more global media around this idea of the geodesy crisis, and the inverted geospatial pyramid was put out there. It's a really nice graphic around the underpinning and fundamental nature of geodesy and how everything's kind of teetering on top of it. The $1 trillion geospatial economy, so it's not just societal benefits that we're bringing, it's economic benefits as well, and that there are a distinct set of vulnerabilities and risks that we can look to mitigate as we drive forward this idea of we need more geodesists come and join the fray. I did want to point a little bit on the efforts that have been going on under the United Nations framework. So it started with a United Nations resolution that's has the tag 69266 that was pretty fun. It was pretty important in getting a UN resolution in the recognition of the importance of geodesy and the global geodetic reference frame in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I feel like this was a really big win, getting viewpoints of the decision makers within the UN framework to understand and get the knowledge out there of geodesy and its fundamental importance for progressing the Sustainable Development Goals. So there, I guess, with the opening of the Geodetic Centre of Excellence in Bonn, they're doing some fantastic work on reaching out and talking to the powers that be around what's our current reliance on positioning, what are the vulnerabilities in the supply chain that support geodesy, and how can we build the workforce that underpins it all. So currently, the Global Geodetic Centre of Excellence are focusing very strongly on the geodetic infrastructure and the supply chain. And what we now recognise very widely, I guess, across some of the policy initiatives that are going on in the UK and the US is that we also need the people for strong positioning, navigation, timing, geodetic systems, and that the geodetic skills are at the foundation, as well as the mastermind and the glue that make all of these systems exist and persist. So there's fantastic recognition across, again, a variety of mechanisms that geodesy is coming to the forefront of its importance to society. And there was a really nice series of webinars that were a couple of years ago around the power of where are we going, where do we want to get to, and location. So I've kind of walked through a little bit of the global context about why we need geodesists and some things that are going on in globally, but I wanted to bring it back home down to Australia. So in Australia, we are very keen to understand our Earth system, and we have a variety of specialists and geodesists that are working across many different problems to help us understand the shape, orientation, and changes to the gravity field of Earth. This is one of my pictures from my PhD that I thought I'd pull out again, one, because it's a beautiful graphic, but also it keeps reminding me that we live on an incredibly dynamic and restless planet, right? So we all know that what we're trying to do is understand this system of systems and understand the Earth's physical properties, but it all relies on having a robust system of reference and the need for the alignment of all of this beautiful spatial data that we're collecting. So an example of that in Australia is our Australian Geospatial Reference System, which for us is the collection of the datums, both static and dynamic datums, the collection of regional reference frames and working surfaces that help us define latitude, longitude, and height throughout Australia. It's also the infrastructure. So we have a variety of different geodetic infrastructure across Australia, including the National Network of Global Navigation Satellite System, CORS, and continuously operating reference stations. We have the Survey Mark database, which are all contributing to provide that authoritative and accurate network in support of positioning applications. Then we also have the models and the tools that describe the dynamic and the geophysical processes that affect our spatial measurements. And then we have the work that goes on almost behind the scenes around the standards to ensure that all of this information, all of the models and the data are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and aligning with those international standards as well. All of the components of the reference system need geodesists to bring it together. And I guess that's one of our fundamental roles at Geoscience Australia is we house that capability, we maintain that capability, and we coordinate it across the other variety of jurisdictions and people that we work with. I guess in the research and academic space, we hit pretty heavy with our geodesists. We do a lot of work around the crustal deformation of Australia. And one of the examples is where we're contributing back internationally and globally is around the calibration and validation of various satellite altimetry missions, looking at one of, I guess, our biggest societal questions is what is sea level doing and what's its variability and how is it changing? What is the impact of that? And so all of the work that we're doing is influencing policy and decision making. And for some of those big questions, where am I? Where are my things? Where am I going? How do I get there? Why is everything moving around me? And we're able to provide the support and the advice and the data and the evidence to back those questions up. To take a little bit of a side note around what I've observed in Australia recently is the absolute explosion of what we're calling spatial and digital twins, the ability to virtually represent your environment, whether that's a 3D model of a building or a tunnel that's being built. In Australia, there's been a real push and investment in creating digital or spatial twins of our cities, of our jurisdictional areas. And so even just this week, we had the announcement of Spatial WA, which is, it was a $140 million investment in delivering a spatial digital twin for the entirety of the state of Western Australia. So that entire western side, they're going to create a digital representation or a digital twin. And it's not unique. In New South Wales, they launched the Live New South Wales Spatial Digital Twin project, which will deliver a cross-sector collaborative environment that will share and visualize location information in a 4D model of the real world in near real time to support decision making. So this idea that you can digitally represent the infrastructure, the facilities, any and all in a centralized location that's then interrogatable to help answer questions around prediction modeling of what might happen if there's an inundation event, for example, or where is the entirety of our energy network and how does that relate to the other infrastructure around us? And it goes on. They've got the same thing in Victoria. There's a huge project up in Brisbane around at the moment in digitising the Cross River Rail project. So bringing together this idea that they want to build an entire underground network under the Brisbane River, which is pretty impressive. Other big data initiatives like the Living Lab down in Adelaide, which is working with MIT, and the list goes on. So across virtual Tas, the Northern Territory, the entirety of Australia is going to be digitally represented, which is pretty impressive. But you need geodesists to provide the frame of reference over all which this spatial data can be aligned and interrogated. So it's wonderful that we're going to have these beautiful digital representations of the infrastructure of the people of whatever you're representing. But if you can't align it above a common reliable reference frame, it's almost next to useless to be able to inform decision making. So you need geodesists to be able to define and provide access to that frame of reference and the alignment of that spatial data. So that's one of the big things here in Australia that I've recognised recently. And then to bring it back home to my hat at Geoscience Australia, we've noticed a massive demand across industry, across society for precise positioning and the variety of applications that open because you have access to precise positioning, whether it's satellite information, autonomous navigation, precision agriculture is a big one in Australia, the use of smartphones in the shipping and aviation and military. The drive and the need for precise positioning is increasing every day. And with that comes the ask for increased efficiency and the ability for increased safety that precise positioning can deliver. So the Australian government recognised this and invested pretty heavily in the Positioning Australia program off the back of our existing strong foundation in geodesy and reference frames. So recognising the leadership around geodesy and our ability to implement the National Geospatial Reference System, GA were provided with the funding to invest in precise positioning infrastructure, to invest in the positioning services. There was a report done that we had around the value that precise positioning brings to the Australian economy. And this was quite a conservative estimate based off one service out of our augmentation system, delivering around 10 centimetre positioning for everybody across Australia and New Zealand, that it would bring $6.2 billion to the Australian economy. And we tested that over 10 different industry sectors, and I'll go into that examples in the reports a little bit more. But it's this idea that investment in the infrastructure and the provision of precise positioning pays off for the economy, for decision making, but it relies on having good geodesy foundations and good geodesists. So to go a little bit further into the Positioning Australia program, we're delivering precise positioning services that are reliable, accurate, nationally consistent and openly accessible. So this is being delivered through three major projects. The first one is the Southern Positioning Augmentation Network, or SouthPAN, which is a joint initiative of the Australian and New Zealand governments to provide a satellite-based augmentation system for both Australia and New Zealand. SouthPAN comprises of reference stations, telecommunications infrastructure, computing centres, signal generators, and satellites that are providing the improved positioning and navigation services in Australia and New Zealand and across our maritime region. but you need geodesists to do this, right? You need satellite engineers to do this. You need a variety of skills that kind of sit in that background and the understanding of this is a location-based service. How do we deliver that? The second one is the national positioning infrastructure. We call it NPIC, which is providing a unified approach to the management of our national positioning infrastructure. It's quite focused on the GNSS side, but we also host a realm of other geodetic infrastructure in Australia, and work with industry and other government agencies to bring that together. So NPIC is ensuring that we have consistent and fit-for-purpose positioning data and services that's available across sector, and we do that by coordinating a unified national network of that infrastructure, and enabling Australian businesses to deliver and achieve their centimetre accurate positioning services across Australia, with access to mobile phone coverage. And I think what was really interesting was just last year we did another economic impact analysis assessment that found that the investment in this style of positioning infrastructure is estimated to inject around an extra $545 million in benefits by the mid-2030s. And that included a direct benefit to agriculture, which is one of the major sectors of the pickup and the use of precise positioning in Australia. And that was estimated to contribute around $365 million in direct benefit to the mining, agriculture and construction sectors. So Australia follows the mining industry very closely. Our economy relies on the Boston boom quite significantly around mining. Agriculture is also another huge industry here for us. So it's important that we're able to provide them with the best available access to positioning services in an open and accessible manner. But you need geodesists to do that. So the last one I wanted to mention here is the tools and the software and the back-end digital infrastructure that we're also delivering under this program, where we've got a suite of open source analysis tools. This one is known as Ganan, and it's used to analyze global navigation satellite system data in real time to generate IGS-like products in support of precise positioning. And we're using it at GA to help validate and verify the data that's coming in from the National Positioning Infrastructure Network of over 700 sites, ensuring that our customers and on-sellers are only accessing the data that can be trusted. So that's kind of the big investment in Australia in positioning. And these are some of the impacts that's had. So this is the report that we commissioned, estimating and looking at the economic impact around the benefits of precise positioning. So this was based off a 10-centimetre positioning capability. We ran a test bed for around 2 years, looking at 45 different applications through 10 industry sectors. And some of the pertinent points that I wanted to point out around in the agricultural sector, it found that Australian farmers will be able to develop and adopt future technologies like virtual cattle fencing, precision guidance of their machinery, whether that be tractors, harvesters, trucks. And it also found that access to positioning will improve their efficiency in the spraying of nutrients and chemicals, reducing that need to overspray by around 1% and 7%, so that they can only spray exactly where they need it. And that has the environmental impact as well, where we're reducing the chemicals that are surrounding our agricultural sector. So again, in the transportation sector, we saw some brilliant examples around flying doctors and medevacs being able to land safer, arrive faster, meaning that there's much better access in regional and rural, remote Australian regions, helping people get the critical help that they need in those moments where every second counts. And then again, in the construction sector, it was really noted that the safety aspect of access to precise positioning was going to be really important, such as geofencing and collision avoidance, preventing an estimated 30 fatalities, and around preventing an estimate of sort of in the thousands of reduction of serious injuries over the next 30 years. So again, this ability to have access to positioning is fundamentally reliant on the geodetic infrastructure that sits behind it. So you need geodesists to provide these impacts and value to society. So I mean, this isn't everything that we do at Geoscience Australia. It's not just focused on the delivery of these products and services. We also host a lot of other pieces of geodetic infrastructure with a national authority on geodesy and verification of position. You need geodesists for that. With a lead for positioning and navigation in the Australian government, you need geodesists for that. We operate the geodetic infrastructure in partnership with some of our academic and industry partners, but around the applied geoscience research side of it as well. You need geodesists for that. So I think it's pretty clear that at Geoscience Australia, from the government side, we need geodesists. And we have a pretty proud history of training geodesists in Australia, but it's getting harder. In a recent couple of rounds of recruitment, we've really struggled to find domestic candidates that have been suitable to bring in to GA across geodesy, across engineering, and across digital infrastructure. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. So to kind of go through a little bit of the history and some of the context and the challenges in Australia, we're a relatively young country, but we have a pretty good tradition of training geodesists. But it's through the traditional pathway of survey programs in the main tertiary education system. And attracting domestic students to that has been quite challenging. What I've observed is that there's a reasonably weak academic and educational cohesion at the tertiary level, where there's a risk that this fragmented nature of the training at tertiary level is I guess it's entirely dependent on the individual strategic choices of those independent universities and training institutions with no joined up commitment around a sovereign capability for geodesy. So how do we bring that together? How do we coordinate a little bit more is something that I'm interested in working through. And there's a question around a couple of conversations that I've had with some friends and colleagues around, does our tradition of training geodesists through the survey streams blinker us to other opportunities? And that's something that we've been talking about at GA. Can we pull geodesists from non-traditional backgrounds? Do they have to come through the surveying stream to be considered a geodesy expert? So I guess the other point is, again, around the we're competing in a really competitive market at GA to try and bring people into the positioning or the geodesy roles that we're seeking people with those foundational skills. Surveyors are in high demand across the rest of industry. And so it's quite often that any survey student in their third or fourth year of university are already employed in the survey industry. And so we're facing a bit of a supply chain crisis in that the rate of surveying undergraduates is low and they're already being competitively snapped up by industry. So to go on to a bit of the broader context around other initiatives that are happening across Australia, I thought I'd broaden the perspective and broaden the picture a little bit more. There are a lot of initiatives across Australia around getting more diversity and more people into STEM. And so there's been a variety of initiatives since these are the ones that I picked out that have been going since 2015. And it's not that we're not focusing on it. I think it's just that in my mind, there's almost too many. Can we focus this and bring it back down? But it's going through the full chain. It's getting people into schools. It's bringing the educators into professional settings and talking to them about what we do and how we do it. It's providing visibility of all of the STEM sciences And so one thought as I was putting this presentation together was, can we add G to STEM? It doesn't fit quite as nicely. The acronym doesn't work quite so well, but can we have science, technology, engineering, maths, and geodesy, and create a geodesy initiative? There was a report released just last month around these variety of initiatives and focusing on diversity and getting particularly women and girls into STEM. And the review by an independent panel recommended that we weren't being ambitious enough in Australia, and that they provided some recommendations around how we could do that. And so this was focused on increasing the diversity in STEM fields, where there were 11 recommendations that came out. And what I liked was that they were including actions around all sectors, so across industry, government, and the education sector, also including what not-for-profits could do, but also there were actions at the level of the individual. So what can you do as an individual to help raise the profile and the diversity of people in STEM fields? And there was one quote that came out of this review that I wanted to share with you today that resonated with me, which was that the recommendations in the report reflect the urgency of supporting and retaining diverse people in our existing STEM workforce, and that we cannot afford to lose anyone. We must harness the potential of all people with a curious mind, a spark for problem solving, and a keenness to build up and change our world. And it resonated with me so strongly because I thought that's what we need to do for Geodesy. So it's not just in STEM in general, getting people interested in the sciences and the technologies and the maths and the geodesy, but it's harnessing that ability to think about our world and how they can make a difference. So in terms of what's going on in Australian industry around workforce planning, getting people interested, these are some of the examples very specifically around the surveying and geospatial sector. So in Australia, we have the Geospatial Council of Australia, which is a representative body that provides education. You can gain accreditation by attending some of their courses. In Australia, to maintain your license as a cadastral surveyor, there's the requirement to each year attend some version of a seminar or a webinar to gain accreditation points to keep your license relevant and up to date. And so this body is very focused on enabling that. It's a community that comes together to discuss the problems, and one of the big conversations ever since I've been part of the GCA has been around workforce. There's a dire need in Australia for surveyors. We have an intensively aging workforce, and the refresh rate of new people coming in with surveying degrees to be able to support the surveying industry is dire. So it's similar to the idea that there's a geodetic crisis. There's a survey crisis, which for us in Australia makes it a geodetic crisis because survey is our traditional stream of attracting people into geodesy. So there was a report released in 2002 around the Australian surveying and spatial workforce, and releasing a roadmap, which again had some actions and implementation ideas around how we can improve that. I was involved with a project called Project Sirius, which was around mapping the future surveyor's role in wider society, and boosting public understanding of the surveying profession, and how we better navigate the changes that are coming, recognising that surveyors need new and different skills, and that there are opportunities and a new frontier for surveying coming. What's been interesting and an observation, this is purely my observation, is that in the survey and spatial world in Australia, geodesy is recognised, but it's not inherent, it's not included, it's not brought to the front. There's no accreditation for geodesy in Australia. There's no, I think we had a bit of a win last year where we finally got it into the jobs framework as a geodetic surveyor, to have that listed as a profession and an occupation. And so there's this ongoing challenge of, what do you call yourself? Am I a surveyor? I am, yes. but I'm a geodesist, and I want to be able to call myself that. And how do I get that recognized in the formal frameworks when it's not supported, whether it's because there's no need for continual professional development in the formalized sense, and so how do we work with that? At Geoscience Australia, we've been undertaking, I love this term, tactical workforce planning, to help us build, develop and retain the workforce with the skills and capabilities that we need to deliver our work programs and deliver and support our agency's strategic priorities. So positioning is one of the major priorities of Geoscience Australia. It's one of the big programs that's currently underway, and we're delivering on that because we've had such a wonderful foundation in geodesy, and we've managed to build our workforce, but we still face quite a lot of challenges getting skilled people. So what we're trying to do is think about how we can draw talent from related fields. They don't have to be a surveyor to become a geodesist. Can we draw from non-traditional backgrounds, and starting our engagement at the undergrad level at the moment? We're developing in-house research projects and encouraging undergrads to pick those up, to come and sit with us, to do an internship, to do a cadet placement. And then from a workforce perspective, our operational environment is changing. So we used to have a lot of surveyors in-house at GA to go out and do surveys, geodetic work, but that's pivoted now. There's been rapid technology changes that we're still trying to play catch up with. There are talent shortages, high competitor rates, and reduction in the talent pipeline, which is creating issues for us. We also face restrictions around our ability to look at international recruitment. And there are some roles at GA that have a need for highly specialised and technical skills, and we need immediate action. So it is something that we're thinking about very broadly and addressing at GA, but always welcome to hear how others are tackling this problem as well. And so to bring it all together, my observation of geodesy in Australia is that we don't have a formalised professional group or an association or an institute or a union. We don't have something like AGU or EGU where there's a distinct geodesy section. We do have groups, but they tend to be only sort of a collection of one or two sectors and not bringing fully everybody together. So we have intergovernmental geodesy groups, but that's focused on the governmental issues. We have more academic focused communities of practice, but that tends to be academic and government joining. We have an industry association around GNSS, so it's associated to geodesy, but very focused on one technique and technology. And again, that tends to be primarily industry and government rather than bringing everybody together. And so I guess there's a question around, do we need a geodesy group in Australia that brings everybody together to help discuss and drive these issues? Would it be helpful to have accreditation for geodesy in Australia in recognition that we can drive skill sets and that geodesy is a tool that many people use, and that it doesn't have to be just a box that you put someone in, that is no longer widely thought about or widely accessible. And I wanted to make the point that we can't afford to hide in the background. We can't afford to just keep doing what we've always been doing. Let's bring geodesy to the forefront, whether that's having a bake-off at work, which is my efforts here, which was trying to describe spherical trigonometry across Australia. Laura did a great job of building some little VLBI dishes and a spiral galaxy, and then there's the beautiful inside cake as well. Is it as simple as bringing your work and your passion for that to sort of your community, and sharing your love of geodesy with everybody? This is something that I really love, and I wanted to call out this from the EGU geodesy section. So what does a geodesy look like? what does a geodesist look like? I think we are a varied, diverse, and wonderful bunch of people. And now that we are starting to draw from a variety of different fields, can we paint the picture of what a geodesist looks like and break down that barrier of it's and I'm not even going to make a wild assumption about what a geodesist looks like because we are so different. But I'd encourage you to join up. There's a very, very short survey to express your interest in having a picture painted of you as a geodesist. So give that a go. I'd love to see more initiatives like this of getting the word out there about what is geodesy, what do we do, what do we look like, what are the impacts that we have. And then the sort of what can you do as an individual? And it's kind of this flow of keep getting the message out there, use the word geodesy, don't be scared to explain the beauty and the importance of what we do. I still find it quite awkward around self-promotion. I'm not a big one for going out and talking about myself, but if you get me started on talking about geodesy, I will happily talk about what I do and why I love it. And so this is a picture of Nick and I doing a radio interview with the local radio station in Canberra around what is geodesy, why is it important? And so I'd encourage each and everybody to get out there to build that knowledge and recognition just in broader society. Talk about what you do, get people interested, and start building that pipeline early for getting people aware of what is geodesy and that they might consider that as something to collectively consider as important and part of their future. And then this last one is my effort of building the next generation of geodesists. These are my two. I love talking about what I do. I think I've had a parenting win already that my daughter, when she's asked what she wants to be when she grows up, she says a scientist. Science is a superpower. So that's my effort of building the next generation and the future of geodesists. But I think it's more to the point that you want to get them early. I think the program that's running in the US from the Kinder to 12 program of getting people aware and interested in geodesy early, even if they don't go into a direct career of becoming a geodesist, at least they're aware of it and they can use the geodesy toolkit in whatever they end up deciding to do. So geodesy is beautiful. Let's get people involved. It is, after all, a global science in all aspects, and can we work together to tackle this geodesy crisis? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Anna. I'm just going to open up everybody. I see some clapping, ability to unmute people and add questions to the chat. Feel free to raise your hands if you have a question for Anna. That was a great summary of topics. I'm glad we didn't try to cram it all into a single little AGU talk.
Yeah, it was a real opportunity for me to expand a lot of these thoughts. So thanks for that.
Great. Does anyone want to lead off with a question for Anna? Again, feel free to use the chat or just unmute yourself and we'll hopefully people have the ability to do that. Or raise your hand and we can call on you. I guess I'll start off with a question then, Anna. The financial numbers that you were sharing, I think were sort of, I guess there's a long report that you can talk in more detail about how were those numbers generated, and those primarily sort of the goal to keep government funding going, or was it sort of just to raise awareness among the industry, and how effective have those numbers been in those goals?
Yeah, so I think it was both. So the big number, the 6.2 billion, was done right at the start of the project. So we'd already got a bit of investment in positioning and the infrastructure that was needed, and the big one was the augmentation system. So it was demonstrating the benefit to then get a little bit more investment and to really solidify the program for its future. But it gave us a really neat opportunity to go and talk directly to industry sectors around, do you use precise positioning? How do you use it? what benefit do you think it brings you now? And here is this future capability we're building. What do you think it's going to help you do in the next 30, 50 years? And it was that ability for us to go and talk to the different industry sectors and really understand their need for positioning, which we had done, I guess, informally in the development of the policy proposal to bring that to government to get the initial investment. But it was two-pronged. Like you say, the numbers were very much a desktop economic analysis. I'm not going to claim to know anything about how those numbers were produced, but I think the real benefit to us was going and talking to those industry sectors around how they use and what their needs are for positioning, and weave in the story about the underpinning fundamental part that geodesy plays as well. So it was a really interesting exercise, and that gave us a lot of material to then build the case studies and the stories around how positioning is used.
Great. All right. Well, we have a few questions in the chat. I guess I'll start with the one that about the recording. So we have the AGU Geodesy section has a webinar page maintained by the person on the call, Bill Hammond. Thank you, Bill. And so that recording will be available there in a couple of days if you want to share it with anyone. I see a question sort of about what's happening in the US. And I think we had a whole webinar on this topic, and so you're free to go back to that page to learn more about it. But I think the situation in the U.S. and in Australia, I think, as Anna talked about, is similar in some respects and different in other respects. I think there's been a recognized need that for certain positions, you're not able to find the people you need to fill those positions, particularly people that for certain sensitive governmental jobs have to have citizenship. And I guess so you're just that's recognized as sort of what is the baseline challenge of the geodesy crisis. You agree with that, Anna?
Yeah, absolutely. We are certainly facing that here as well. I didn't go so deeply into the geospatial intelligence side. That's not my place, but it's certainly something that we are facing here as well, in that there are certain roles, particularly in government and defence, that we need domestic candidates for.
And I guess I'll just to follow up on that is, during our last webinar, there was a discussion of, okay, I loved your comment on having a broad brush of what do we call geodesists. And so there was some discussion in our last webinar on this topic of, well, to what extent can you bring in someone trained as a physicist or an engineer and then, on the job, give them training? And to what extent is that a useful solution? And is that take too long, or is too expensive, or not a viable option? What do you think?
It's something that we've had to do by necessity. And some of the best geodesists I know and work with have not come through the traditional survey stream. They've come from mathematics, physics, astrophysics. And so it's absolutely possible. And I think the diversity that brings actually strengthens geodesy as a science, because they connected to different worlds, right? So that idea that you have your geodesy bubble, which is small, but how do we increase that bubble? And by connecting with others in their own bubble, you start to build the recognition and the world of geodesy. And I think even though geodesy can be incredibly technical, and you require a distinct amount of expertise, if you strip it all the way back to, I don't know, who is good at geodesy, we tend to be quite logical, we tend to be quite maths and physics driven, and we tend to want to make a difference. And I think those skills can be found in a multitude of or those characteristics can be found in a lot of other places. So the on-the-job training and the drawing from different fields is certainly something we're doing at GA and in Australia in general.
Great. Well, I see a question here from Luciana, sort of asking the question of, a lack of geodesists reflected in sort of a general trend in geoscience careers. And I think that, again, there have been a whole series of articles about declining majors in tertiary education, in Australia, in the US, in the UK, a variety of places. And I guess Do you have thoughts on the relationship between those? Is this a broader, STEM related uh, decline, or geoscience only, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in Australia, where the geodesy isn't as tightly coupled to the geoscience and geophysics world as potentially in others. So I think of AGU as an example, right? AGU is Geophysical Union, and then you have geodesy section within that. Um, in Australia, we don't really have that coupling of geoscience other than at Geoscience Australia, with geodesy. That we tend to come from quite academic or the survey and spatial sector rather than the geosciences sector. And although they're tightly coupled, there's a bit of a distinct divide between that. But I think absolutely overall, the decline in STEM graduates, the decline in interest in STEM and geoscience and geophysics is impacting our ability to get people into geodesy. Yeah, it's just, I don't, yeah, there are no answers to this. It's only doing what we can to kind of stem the flow, to reduce the flow around getting people interested. And it's not clear why people aren't as interested in STEM or geosciences. I think there's a myriad of valid and rewarding careers. But whether that idea of one career path that you stick with for your entirety of your professional lifespan, whether that's a barrier, and the need for that deep delve into many years of education to call yourself a geodesist or a surveyor or a geospatial scientist, maybe that's off-putting.
Yes, no, I think that's super interesting. I think that, at least some ideas about a decline in geoscience is sort of a perception that it's very related to resource extraction industries.
Yeah.
And clearly surveying is part of that story, but clearly has broader applications. Great. Any other questions from anybody? I think that was a good set again.
Hello, I have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Joey.
Many of the people with STEM backgrounds who might otherwise be interested in geodesy are diverted into higher paying fields a lot of times. What do you think would need to change to pay geodesists more?
Or I don't know. I guess it comes down to a question of what motivates the individual, right? And if that is pay, um, that's something to keep in mind. I'm not personally motivated by that. For me, geodesy is about making a difference and the curiosity aspect, right, of mapping our world. So, um, yeah, I don't know whether a lot of the geodesy jobs are either in Australia, in particular, either in academia or government. There's not I wouldn't say that there's a strong geodesy industry. The jobs mainly sit in either government or academia, and so whether you could create a geodesy industry where there are higher paying jobs, because that typically tends to be what happens, is that industry is paying much better market rate for people with spatial and geodesy skills. How you drive that to attract more people into it is not my motivator, because then I don't get geodesists within government. I don't know. It's a bit of a curly response to a curly question.
Okay, yeah. So Estelle has got a comment in the chat. I guess you can read. That's sort of a question about branding, that people are doing geodesy jobs that may not be listed as such. And so I don't know if that is an issue that you are finding as well, in terms of people who are using geodesy skills in jobs that maybe don't use that particular term.
Yeah, and I think this is the recognition that geodesy and the science of geodesy and the toolkit that's available to others that we would classify as geodesy is it's very broad. And so I'm a big advocate for using the word geodesy, sliding in there as much as you can to raise the awareness of what is geodesy, and how the skills are relevant. And I think it's an awareness raising exercise that, if you can call yourself a geodesist, please do, because then we have more geodesists, but also you're raising awareness around what geodesy is and what it can be used for. But it's really hard. Like in our as part of our workforce mapping and planning exercise at GA, we had to align the roles, so the roles and responsibilities of the people that we have within a certain jobs framework. And it was really quite hard. Like the generic one was geoscientist. It's like, okay, but there are many different versions of a geoscientist. Is there a breakdown of that? And there just wasn't. So kind of everybody, whether they were technical, whether they were non-technical, just got lumped into geoscientist. And so I think the representation of geodesy in that level of sort of much higher decision-making admin side is just not there. So trying to bring the word geodesy as a profession, as a career, as a job, into those more formalized frameworks is something that I'd be working towards. But yeah, it's a really interesting problem, and something I have thought about for a long time. When I kind of first became or started calling myself a geodesist with my first job at GA, and I was looking to try and join one of at the time it was called the Survey and Spatial Institute as a professional industry body. I didn't feel like I fit. Like I could call myself a surveyor, sure, but I wanted to call myself a geodesist, and that just didn't exist to be able to do that. In that framework, I was either a cadastral surveyor, a hydrographic surveyor, or a spatial professional. It's like, well, none of those feel like where I want to fit. So we managed to get geodetic surveyor listed as one of the professions under the jobs framework. But again, that doesn't suit everybody. So yeah, the geodesy branding is part of the discussion that I think we need to build that.
Great. Well, one more question has just rolled in that you can take a look at. I think, again, it's sort of about marketing geodesy to a general audience and making it sound exciting and not quote unquote already solved. It sounds like some of the initiatives that you were talking about, you know, how to picture geodesists, talking about the problems that you're solving, how they're societally beneficial, you know, competing with pictures of distant galaxies is maybe always going to be hard. But you have anything initial thoughts you want to talk about, like what grabs people's attention?
Yeah, look, I think space is big again, right? We've gone through this cycle where space is now top of the pops and what everybody's talking about again. And geodesy has a role to play there. So I think if you can kind of pick the interest of the day and align geodesy to that, in the branding and the marketing, in the way that you talk about what is whatever, if it's societal priority, if it's government priority, if it's your personal priority, if we can keep weaving geodesy in there, I think we'll get on the path to raising the awareness of what geodesy is. But I think it's a nice comment by Graham that there are these other big new, whether it's new technologies, whether it's new frontiers of space exploration. It is potentially drawing people away from geodesy, and maybe it's the way we talk about geodesy. It doesn't have to be the theoretical calculation modeling stuff behind a computer style geodesy. It can be the you're making an impact, you're making a difference, you're mapping the world style geodesy.
Well, it's also, as you said earlier, they can go off and study astrophysics and they can come back and do geodesy later.
Then you can come back to the dark side. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time, but I want to thank you again, Anna. This has been a great discussion. Really appreciate it. And again, please feel free to share this link once Bill gets it posted and we get it from AGU, hopefully in the next day or two. But thanks again, everybody. And thanks again, Anna.
Thanks all.